All right, thanks Mitch and Eric for inviting me. I don't have the same lung capacity as you two. I'm going to take this slow. I'm actually just going to present a single finding from some research that we're beginning to do in the lab looking at neuroreactivity and its link to depression. And most people in this room are familiar with this work. George set it up nicely in his talk, if people listen to it, that the social pain theories of depression suggest that if you have challenges to social bonds, that you actually see activation in the same neural circuitry that's involved in processing the affective component of physical pain, which may lead to emotional distress. And social challenges also can activate neural circuitry involved in processing social threat or evaluation, such as the amygdala. And then it's been proposed that this neuroreactivity can interfere with emotion regulation and with coping efforts, which would lead to depression. And adolescence has actually been implicated as a period during which we see particularly heightened social sensitivity. And this has been found to be particularly true in girls, which has been suggested to account for their higher levels of depression during this developmental stage. And there's actually a lot of good evidence for the links between neuroreactivity and depression, particularly in girls, much of it based on research conducted by people in this room. But I really just want to make a single point today, and that point is that we really need to consider individual differences, as we were talking about earlier. This link between neuroreactivity and depression may be particularly relevant for subgroups of individuals. And what we focused on in this study was thinking about the role of social context and how there are intersections between neuroreactivity and social context. So picture paints 1,000 words. We don't have a lot of words here. I'm just going to show you our thoughts really briefly in linking the physical pain literature with social pain. So as George has talked about, there are individual differences in the extent to which people are sensitive to physical pain. But obviously this really isn't relevant unless they're exposed to repeated physical injury, in which case they're going to feel higher levels of physical pain. And so we wanted to extend the social pain metaphor to think about adolescent girls' neural sensitivity to depression. So if we have adolescent girls who are neurally sensitive, it's obviously reasonable to speculate that they're only going to express emotional pain or depression if they're actually exposed to repeated social injury in their everyday lives. This social injury would keep triggering these stress-sensitive neural systems, which may be more likely to lead to a continuation of depression rather than just momentary sadness. So we examined this idea in a longitudinal study. And these were adolescent girls who had been participating in a long-term study of peer victimization. And so we were able to actually prospectively assess their victimization from the 2nd to 8th grade. Each year they reported on their exposure to peer victimization, which allowed us to really get at this repeated social injury in a prospective way. And then when they were adolescents, they came into the lab and they did a functional brain scan while they were completing the game of cyberball. George, you set up everything nicely. He had a nice demonstration. But basically, this is a lab manipulation of social exclusion, which we thought would be particularly relevant to children who've been chronically victimized by their peers. And as we expected, these are whole brain analyses. We found that the areas that are implicated in social pain or social threat processing, such as the DACC and the amygdala. So when girls showed more activation in these regions during the social exclusion relative to inclusion condition, they were more likely to be depressed if they were chronically victimized. And as you can see, there's a pretty significant difference here. So the girls who were non-victimized really didn't show any higher levels of depression regardless of their neural reactivity. This was true in both the DACC and the amygdala. These findings are robust if we adjust for variables that might be associated with peer victimization and depression. So we controlled for SES, ethnicity, pubertal status, pubertal timing, and these findings are pretty robust. So I just have one take-home message for you, which is that when we think about neural sensitivity and depression, we really need to consider social context. We need to think about interactions between neural vulnerability and interpersonal or social context to understand why adolescent girls might be at greater risk for depression.